Welcome back to the Racial Draft Podcast, where we change the complexion of the comic book universe one draft pick at a time. I am your host, Michael Ford, taking you on the ride that is the fourth round of the seventh season of the Racial Draft. I am not joined by any guests, but we have a lot of racial draft business to get to and attend to. So let's just hop right in. If this is your first episode, I apologize, but what we do here is we draft characters of the various delegations, we reimagine them, and we discuss whether those reimaginings may or may not be valid or may not be beneficial to those characters as racially drafted. And starting us off with a little bit of aplomb, as it were, Laura Kinney. You might know her as X-23. You may also know her as the second Wolverine, maybe even the third Wolverine, but the second one for whom the codename has stuck. Logan's daughter, who was thought for many years to be Logan's female clone. You know, shenanigans, right? However, in the first round of the racial draft, Logan was drafted by the White Delegation. But in this round, in the fourth round, she was drafted by the Native American delegation. This is not the first time the Native American delegation has drafted Laura. There have been some really cool backstories uh, encompassing that designation, as so to speak. But this is the first time uh, that Laura has not been paired with her father in terms of ethnic background. Now, as we know, if we've talked about before, whiteness is a bit of a social construct. So there are avenues by which someone who is has mixed genetics could still be perceived as white. Perhaps some of those things are at play with Wolverine, with Logan, as it were, is what I meant. But in any event, with Laura, there are some ways because of the genetic engineering that created her, as well as the fact that she was raised apart from her father, and also there was a surrogacy as well. So there are a lot of elements by which different culture could be introduced into her story. One of the things that longtime readers of the character and followers of the character would know is that when she was introduced in, I believe, the X Men Evolution cartoon, and also in the early, I can't remember the book where her first appearance was. I want to say it was something with an X in it, so, not surprisingly. But yes, she was very much coded as a woman of color. And in fact, some of her experiences in the early part of her story, such as being trafficked and being experimented on, which is also the experimented on as part of the Logan story as well. But the dehumanization of her early days, before she, finds her identity again. She was known as X-23. She didn't even have a name for a significant portion of her early days. A lot of that mirrors the experience, the real world experiences of First Nations and Native Americans, unfortunately in North America, and most likely in Central America as well. So for all these reasons, notwithstanding Logan's white status, for all these reasons, it's definitely a reason that I myself would approve of this racial draft of of Laura Kinney as Native American. For some reason my computer is moving a little bit slow, so I'm gonna have to vamp a little bit more than I might ordinarily do it. But yeah, for me, I strongly approve of this racial drafting. And as of yet, by the time you listen to this podcast, listeners, the approval polls, which you can find at racialdraft.com, also on Twitter at racial draft pod. You can also find approval polls on uh, on Threads. I was about to say IG, but it's Threads at this point. But yeah, I mean, follow us at any of those three places, and you can see the pics immediately after they appear, and you can go ahead and make your voice known as to whether you approve. Once again, I'll remind you, racialdraft.com, racial draft on Twitter, racial draft pod on Twitter, and racial.draft on Instagram and on Threads. But yeah, so the people, they're a little bit mixed on the idea of Native American Laura, which is a little unfortunate. 80, sorry, I'm gonna have to do this math in my head. 81.8% approval for Native American Laura Kinney. With respect to the breakdown, it is 63.6% strongly approve, 18.2 somewhat approve, 9.1% somewhat disapprove, and 9.1% racist. But moving on, I should have mentioned that there was a fan cast presented along with this pick. As of yet, this fan cast is Amber Midthunder. You might know her from when she was in Prey. And yeah, as of now, it is a 100% approval rating for Amber Midthunder as Laura Kinney. Hopefully, you get your picks in on that, and yeah, I agree with the unanimous. I agree with the unanimous voting for Amber Midthunder. We will move on from that pick to a pick that maybe a little harder to imagine. Hopefully, not too hard to imagine, and that would be Oliver Queen, aka the Green Arrow, by way of the Southeast Asian delegation. If you are a repeat listener, you remember that last week there was a trade, and one of the pieces of the trade was the fourth round pick, which used to belong to the Latinx delegation, and was this week traded to the Southeast Asian delegation. So they went right ahead and found them a Korean American, Oliver Queen. As I've often joked, the difference between Quan and Queen. You can imagine a family who might want to reinvent themselves in an Americanized, somewhat racist environment, could call themselves the Queens instead of the Quans, or the Queen. Again, I don't know too many. Yeah, I'm gonna respectfully back away from other names that might sound like Queen, that might be Korean. But again, I think that the Queen family, Quan/Queen family, could easily kind of translate. Maybe not as easily as some others. Obviously, one big component of Oliver Queen's story is that he's such a staunch liberal, and sometimes kind of gets in trouble because of his do-gooder nature, because he grew up very privileged, and he often doesn't quite understand the interplay between his political beliefs and the effects that those beliefs might have, on the people that the policies that he supports rather, may affect. At the end of the day, he is still a rich boy doing superheroics in place of, or sometimes in tandem with, social activism. He was before the phrase social justice warrior. He very much was one of those. So it's in that sense, it's not totally surprising that especially given his iconic look of the blonde hair and the Robin Hood-esque persona. Perhaps it's not that surprising that the people aren't quite seeing the vision the way I have with respect to Asian American Oliver Queen. We're looking at 55.5% approval rating for East Asian Oliver Queen, with 22.2 strongly approved, 33.3 somewhat approve, 11.1 somewhat disapprove, and 33.3 racist. Whew. There was also a fan cast submitted. You might know this actor from a number of things. Daniel Henney, who is both an actor and a model. And he can definitely pull off the goatee, the iconic uh, Green Arrow goatee. So the approval rating is a little bit higher, 62.5. Still not quite in the B plus range, as it were. But 50% strongly approve, 12.5 somewhat approve, 25% somewhat disapprove, and 12.5% racist. But we move on. We move on. That pick was a little bit more controversial than I was expecting, but perhaps I should have been a little wiser about the difficulty in squaring the circle in terms of the vision, particularly when it comes to how he's visually depicted. Uh, Moving from one extreme to another, one of our famous defensive picks, and who better than the Black Delegation? More on that later. To draft Sam Wilson, formerly the Falcon, currently Captain America, one of two Captain Americas. He is also going to have a movie as Captain America, so he's having a little bit of a moment. That movie is still over a year away, so maybe not too much of a moment. He's of course in the Avengers in the comics. He is. He's been in the Avengers as the Falcon in some animated works, and he's expected to be in the Avengers in the live action MCU. So yeah, this is a character that is very much identified with the Black experience. For many years, he was kind of white. Steve Rogers' Black conscience, his connection from his era, the pre-war / World War II, Greatest Generation era, and Sam Wilson sort of brings him up to speed with the struggle for justice since then, what it means to be an American since then. So he's very much bridging the gap between old school and new school in terms of what it means to be a Captain America. And what comes with that is often the pressure of not being able to do enough to bring the two Americas together. He is a Black man, and a Black man who attempts to wear the colors of the red, white, and blue, sometimes sees that those colors, in fact, do run. Um, but for that, I'm a little bit shocked that the approval rating is as low as it is. It's at 75%, with all 75% strongly approving of Sam Wilson staying Black. 12.5 are somewhat disapproving of that, and another 12.5 are strongly disapproving of a Black Sam Wilson. I would question who these disapprovers are, and as to who Sam Wilson or how Sam Wilson would better be represented other than as a Black man. With respect to the fan cast, they're sticking with the chalk. They're sticking with Anthony Mackie, who has played him for many years, and the approval rating for that casting is 83.3%, with 75 strongly approving, and 8.3 somewhat approving, and 8.3 somewhat disapproving, and 8.3 strongly disapproving. They have not liked Anthony Mackie in this role, apparently. But we press on. This pick is another repeat pick from another repeat pick that you might have seen in previous seasons, and that pick would be from the Jewish delegation. They have drafted Barbara Gordon, Barbara Gordon, who has both been Batgirl as well as Oracle, when she was in her period of being in a wheelchair due to some injuries that she suffered at the hand of the Joker. Now I think they've tried to maintain her her role as a representation for disabled individuals, and while continuing to kind of keep her in the role that she's been traditionally in of Batgirl, by saying that she does have to spend some time in the chair to because her condition necessitates it. So it's very much. I mean, there are people who are wheelchair users who don't have to use it all the time, but it is a part of their experience. So I think that we it remains to be seen how many disabled writers will write the character over the years, but I would imagine that that's going to be an ongoing part of her experience of her how the character is written going forward. Still being disabled, but not being unable to serve as Batgirl while also serving as Oracle. So for that, none of those aspects of the story necessitate her being, kind of in her traditional depiction. How obviously with the Jewish delegation, um, there are a lot of Jewish people who can be read as white and can be depicted as white passing, or even white identifying. um, in this situation, it means that she just gets to look the way that she's always looked, for the fan cast kind of supports that. Zoe Deutsch, I think that's how her name is pronounced. Um, you know, there are pictures of her with the red hair and with the glasses that kind of seem like it could be pulled right from the comic book. So I'm a little bit surprised to see the approval rating for Jewish Barbara Gordon sitting right now at 57.2%, with 42.9 strongly approving, 14.3 somewhat approving, 28.6 somewhat disapproving, and 14.3 strongly disapproving of Jewish Barbara Gordon. I would hope that that's not anti-Semitism at work. It might be, given what's been happening in the world. Um, as far as with the approval rating for the fan cast, 50% strongly approve, 25% somewhat approve. So that's 75% approval rating and 25% strongly disapprove of the fan cast. And again, I don't know enough about Zoe Deutsch as an actress to know whether this is about her or about just dissatisfaction with the idea of Jewish Barbara Gordon. Um, this, we're on to the second of the two picks from the East Southeast Asian delegation. This is another repeat from last season, and that would be the sorry, wait for it to load, and that would be Electra Nachios. Um, you might know her from multiple seasons of Daredevil. You might know her from the comics, where she's a longtime love interest and now currently serving in the role of Daredevil alongside Matt Murdock. She's gone through a bit of a redemption arc, and I'm enjoying it. I do think that um, in terms of the racially drafting of Elektra, it can be done. We've seen it in the live action Netflix Daredevil, which was recently recanonized, whereby she was adopted. She was still raised by a powerful Greek man, and raised with the I wouldn't say the culture of someone with Greek heritage, but at least as Greek citizenship, and combined with the sort of power and influence and um, what's the word I'm looking for? The seasoning of someone with that kind of privilege. I mean, I think that it's not so far removed from what she is in the comics, and additionally, in the by making her um, East Asian, you are kind of moving ever so slightly away from the notion of the white ninja being somehow the more deserving ninja than the Asian ninja. Obviously, this isn't to say that there couldn't be a very talented white ninja, but it is a trope, of the martial artist who is not of that background somehow finding a way to move up the chain uh, faster than faster than people who from the culture with under which that art originated. So all that is to say that I'm not shocked at all that there is a 100% approval rating for East Asian Electra, with 87.5 strongly approving, 12.5 somewhat approving of East Asian Electra. With respect to the fan cast, I think that at least one person, was disappointed that that the actress, why am I forgetting her name now? Give me a moment. The actress who played Elodie Young, thank you. Um, that Elodie Young was not chosen for this fan cast, but 87.5 approval rating is nothing to nothing to sneeze at. Arden Cho was chosen. I know that she's been in the Teen Wolf program. I'm not sure what else she's been. I think she's going to be part of the Last Airbender series, in fact. But she's. I believe she has martial arts training and sword training. I can definitely see her in the role, but I did rather enjoy Elodie Young, um, her interpretation of the character. Um, yeah, another win for the East Southeast Asian delegation, as far as I'm concerned. Moving on, I we go to the multiracial delegation. This was a little trickier, I would imagine. Their selection was Starfire, aka Coriander. Now, to start us off, I mean, she is an alien, um, but uh, there are there's a lot of things sort of coded into her story that make you imagine her as at very least a person of color, and b could even push you as far as towards being black coded. In fact, last season she was drafted by the Black Delegation. Her big part of her story is that she was a queen, or sorry, a princess, and her family, as part of a power struggle, uh, you know, w- I don't remember the exact mechanism by which she was sort of taken away from her family, but then she was enslaved. And then, as part of, she was able to escape enslavement. She comes to Earth, where she is kind of, depending on when you pick up on the story. There have been certain reimaginings of the story. She's obviously been in the Teen Titans, and she's had a romance with Robin, but they've also had periods in her time where, in her older, older periods, she's embraced kind of a more sexual, um, sex positive, if not sexually empowered, uh, way of being, which enables her to wear not so many clothes and be depicted in quite a fierce but still sexual way. I think that a lot of it, there's a little bit of fetishization that happens with Starfire and sexualization in the character, and when you tie it to the the history of slavery. I think that she codes more strongly as a woman of color. I think in terms of her complexion, she's kind of golden brown. Obviously, there are people who pay money for tans of that complexion, but then there are people who for whom that complexion comes naturally. And I think that that's an argument, strong argument, as to why the multiracial delegation, uh, excuse me, could claim her under the sort of umbrella of racial ambiguity. Not quite sure what her background is. Starfire seems to make a lot of sense under that umbrella. As far as the approval rating, we are looking at 83.3% approval of that 83. With rounding. So that's 66.6, 66.7, depending on how you round. Strongly approve, 16.7 somewhat approve, and 16.7% somewhat disapprove of multiracial Starfire. Again, there's the polls are still open, so if you have strong opinions or even weak opinions, go ahead and go to the different places: racialdraft.com, racial draft pod on Twitter, and racial.draft, and make your voices known. Get your votes in for these picks and for others. Moving on, we are here. We are here. This is the pick that has led to a lot of turmoil. I should mention for some of the newer listeners that the powers of the racial draft are not infinite. Sometimes, despite the fact that our slogan is "All things are possible," some things, even if possible, are not preferred. So we had, a few seasons back, we introduced the idea of the challenge. The basic idea behind the challenge is that sometimes a pick of a racially drafting and race bending a character somewhat, not even somewhat, egregiously, detrimentally affects the character in such a way that the character doesn't really work. As I often say, you break the character. You could break the character if you reimagine a character too far outside of how that character is traditionally depicted. And I would argue that this is an instance of that. However, I'm not a dictator. The challenge system allows the people to decide. Best case, ideally, the challenged and the challenger would duke it out on the show. They've done that in the past. They've been allowed to make their respective cases. In this instance, I have cases that were presented to me by the various delegations. Apologies for me having to read off of my phone. But I will start with the delegation mounting the challenge. And that, of course, is the Black Delegation. The Black Delegation is saying that T'Challa, I should have mentioned the character, sorry. T'Challa, the Black Panther, was drafted by the White Delegation. Now, obviously, this is not something that a lot of Black people would support. And there are reasons for that I will get into as I get into the challenge as presented by the Black Delegation. T'Challa of Wakanda appears as a symbol of Black excellence in the pages of Marvel Comics in July 1966, predating the founding of the literal revolutionary group named the Black Panther Party in October 1966. And though it was created by Jewish white men, Wakanda stands out in fiction for its Black racial ethnic majority. Every aspect of its concept, whether aesthetic, spiritual, or cultural, represents aspirational African and African American excellence. Of course, the actual Black Panther Party has had a more profound and lasting real-world impact, and rightfully so. Yet one cannot deny that T'Challa, and the rest of Wakanda's various denizens have taken on their own iconic status, especially among Black fans, since their introduction into comics, and then later into mainstream books, TV, and movies. Worse yet, if T'Challa does not remain a Black man, and specifically a Black Wakandan descended from a line of Black Wakandans, he regresses into one of the long line of unworthy white men that have been lionized as saviors throughout Western fiction. I mean, he makes a strong case. He makes a very strong case for a white T'Challa as being another in a long line of white savior tropes, and one that we as Black people should not support, and one that does irreparable damage to the character. That the character as of T'Challa cannot exist in his best, if you know, even close to his best form as a white man, and it is it's a breaking of the character, and for lack of a better term that I keep coming back to. What the White Delegation has attempted, um, I don't think that they've really. So I'm going to paraphrase because I think the White Delegation's defense is more of an intellectual exercise. Sorry. They're essentially saying that, yeah, you could make his story fit from a narrative sense um, by making him adopted. You could have him be a white person who was adopted by the Wakandans and became an agent of the state, so therefore not the literal king of Wakanda. Um, he is, um, an alter ego. He is someone that the Wakandan power structure uses as a not as a figurehead, but as an agent, as a protector of the throne, rather than being on the throne himself. And as I read this story, what I think about is a character by name of Hunter, who is in fact the adopted brother of T'Challa. He is essentially the leader of their secret police. You might know them as the War Dogs if you only saw the movie. I believe it's pronounced the Hatut Zaraze in Wakandan. He is essentially what if Black Panther was covert. So a lot of the things that they're saying, white white T'Challa would be, um, is embodied in the character of Hunter. The White Wolf, in fact, is his alter ego. So I think that there's already a character that does what the presumed black white the white Black Panther would do. I think that they've already gotten ahead of you on that, and I think that not only would making T'Challa white make the White Wolf redundant, but as was mentioned earlier, it would sort of remove the need for the Black Panther and for Wakanda if they have to have a white man as their king and figurehead. It completely undercuts and cuts the knees out from what Wakanda is supposed to represent. So obviously that's my opinion. Uh, you listeners, I'm going to definitely open this up. We can bring it back to next week and hear out some of you from some of your thoughts. By next week, I will be able to look at what the voting results are, and we can decide whether the challenge is upheld by under if it is upheld, then it means that the Black Delegation would retain T'Challa. If somehow the challenge fails, then it means that the White Delegation will receive the character over the objection of the Black Delegation. So if there was ever a time for the listenership to get involved and to step in and make their voices known, the fate of T'Challa, the Black Panther, lies in your voting hands. So we will move on from that very contentious thing to something a lot lower of stakes, and that is the Swanamena delegation, Connor Kent, aka the clone, well, sort of the quasi clone, I would say, the genetically engineered child of Superman and Lex Luthor. I this is not the first time that the delegation has drafted this character. I mean, I think that the key to uh, Connor Kent is just kind of recognizing that he is not he's not Clark. He doesn't represent the same things that Clark has represented. He generally does have a little bit of a rougher edge. He was raised in a lab, and he does take on a lot of the qualities, even though he's a hero. He struggles with the fact that he's also, in addition to being part Superman, he's also part Lex Luthor. So to that end, Lex Luthor hasn't been drafted yet, but what has generally happened is that Lex Luthor and Connor Kent are both drafted by the same delegation, so that story sort of makes sense. The idea of him, you know, taking on and identifying with his other father rather than for at least some time before ultimately identifying and joining up with his super father, as it were. So as far as for the pick, the approval rating is 85.7, with 57.1 strongly approve, 28.6 somewhat approve, 14.3 somewhat disapprove. There was also a fan cast this time out. And the fan cast is Jerry Habibi, very very good looking guy. if I say so myself, 83.3% approval, and it's all 83.3 strongly approve, with 16.7 somewhat disapprove. Of like I said, Swanamena delegation, Superboy. We press ahead from the 8th pick of the round to the 9th pick of the round, and that is the Polynesian delegation. This is a character the Polynesian delegation has drafted in the past. Rachel Roth, aka Raven. Um, you know, her her history is a little bit muddled, given that she's actually, kind of part demon. I mean, there's no way around it. Her mother, I want to say her name is Victoria Roth. Don't quote me on that. I'm going off the top of my head, but she was a member of a cult that worshipped I believe the demon's name is Athereth, and became pregnant with the child, who grew into Rachel, who was raised, I believe, in foster homes, and then she finds out about her parentage and about her history and about the magic within her. She also was part of the Teen Titans. It's a big Teen Titans run, I think. They're in a prominent role right now in DC Comics. We have seen her in live action on the Titans show, where she was played not by Polynesian, but I think just sort of a regular Australian. She's not typically depicted as Australian in the comics, but again, because of her history, because of the fact that she's been raised in foster care, She doesn't have a strong cultural tie to really any community. Obviously, the name Rachel Roth uh, is suggestive of her having some Jewish heritage, but even that hasn't been really hammered out, especially given the fact that she's got literal demon heritage. And for that reason, it does create a little bit of leeway in terms of her depiction. I've seen her imagined as a woman of color in a number of visual and cosplay uh, representations of her. So, I think that whereas it's not a perfect one to one, her being, race bent completely and having it fit it to perfection. I definitely think there's room for the approval. As of now, though, the approval is only at essentially two-thirds, 66.6 approval, and all 66.67 ish, whatever, is strongly approving, with 22.2% somewhat disapproving and 11.1% strongly disapproving. With respect to the fan cast, Courtney Eden, who you might know from Yellow Jackets, who plays the young Lottie. She is also Polynesian. She's Maori. Yeah, she was chosen as a fan cast. She was chosen as a fan cast a few years back before a lot of people knew who she was, before her time on Yellow Jackets. She's only become even more prominent in the intervening years. So the approval rating for that is 85.7%, with 71.4 strongly approve, 14.3 somewhat approve, and 14.3 somewhat disapprove of Polynesian Raven. And that brings us to the final pick of the round. We'll get to it because I do think I want to talk about it a little bit, kind of wrap my head around the pick, because I'm trying to figure it out. And this is from the South Asian delegation. They have chosen for their pick, in the final pick of the round, uh, James Buchanan, Bucky Barnes, um, former best friend of Steve Rogers. Um, depending on which incarnation, either sidekick from the comics, or best friend, like I said before, from the movies. Childhood best friend, rather. Um, I think that this is challenging. I think this one is more challenging, because my understanding of American history is that um, Indian Americans were not a major immigrant group in the states around that time. I think that while there's definitely a way by which the Bucky, I'll start with the comics. I'll start with the comics. I mean, I think that there's a way in which Bucky, the sort of mascot for Steve Rogers, the sidekick, could be paraded around in a costume, as part of the propaganda efforts in support of the war. I think that unless what was being not depicted, but promoted, unless what was being promoted with respect to Bucky was that he was not um, Indian from India, but Indian from the way that Americans, ignorant Americans, thought that Native Americans were. I mean, I imagine that there's a world in which he told them that he was Indian, and they thought he meant Native American, and the Bucky character was envisioned as um, a Native American caricature. Obviously, we haven't gotten a backstory yet from the South Asian delegation as to how they intend to um, kind of create the mythology around um, the newer mythology around this version of Bucky Barnes. But like I said, it's challenging to see it now. It's challenging to imagine the role that he must have played in the early days, his relationship to Steve Rogers, and how Bucky was perceived, if he were in fact South Asian at a time where South Asians didn't really have a lot of cultural footprint in the 1940s in America specifically. Um, so um, obviously, there's more to his story. The winter soldiering, the the time that he spent as a sleeper agent, the romance that he, in at least in the comics, struck up with Black Widow. Um, there's also in the films. Um, yeah, I mean, it's not to say that he couldn't be something other than white. Last season he was Jewish, and that played very strongly into some of the things that were imbued into the character um, around the time frame of fighting the Nazis for sure. But it's harder. Yeah. Um, Again, not to say that it couldn't exist, but it would definitely um, be add more points that need to be explained, I suppose, about just being period specific. Um, so yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm very curious as to what where the people are with respect to this draft. Obviously, there's a fan cast as well. I shouldn't have said obviously. It's not always a fan cast. The South Asian delegation selected Ranveer Singh, whose work I'm not familiar with. He's a very handsome man who could definitely um, fit the mold of fill out the Winter Soldier costume, as it were. But again, it doesn't really kind of get us through that sort of fundamental question of what is Bucky, who is Bucky in that time frame in the 1940s, if he's Indian American, which again is not something um, that American culture had yet. If I mean, even today, American culture has difficulty wrapping its heads around Indian immigrants. We can only imagine what that would have been like in the earliest days of the 20th century. In fact, apologies in advance if this slows down my computer, but I would like to. Interesting. So yeah, I mean, going by going by some of the websites, it really looks like the the growth of Indian American immigration in the states really came in the 1960s. That there were very severe quotas in place with respect to immigrants that made the vast majority of them European, which tracks with at least what I was understood, what I understood about immigration patterns in New York, where I grew up. And again, that would have also been where Stephen Bucky grew up. So while there could have been a small number, for sure, um, I think that it would be a much larger factor in Bucky's story, being one of very few Indian Americans in New York at that point in time. So it would definitely have to be accounted for and reckoned with in the telling of the South Asian Bucky story. Um, didn't mention the approval rating there. 57.1%. 57.2%. I apologize. 42.9 strongly approve, 14.3 somewhat approve, 35.7% somewhat disapprove, and 7.1% strongly disapprove of South Asian Bucky Barnes. With respect to the fan cast, 75% approval rating for Ranveer Singh, and 50% strongly approve, 25% somewhat approve, 8.3 somewhat disapprove, and 16.7 strongly disapprove of Ranveer Singh as Bucky. And that's it. That's our 10 picks in the fourth round of the racial draft, season 7. Hopefully, you enjoyed the ride that was this round. We've got plenty more rounds to go. Love to hear your thoughts on either the picks that have passed or the picks to come. Some recommendations for your respective delegations. What demographics you rep, as it were. I should have mentioned this at the top, but it's a good enough place as any to mention that there is also a website. Sorry, I've mentioned the website. There's also an email. Yes, racialdraftpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to give us some of your longer form thoughts about the picks. But yeah, racialdraft.com is where you can find everything and anything under the sun: the picks, the polls, the pictures, social media feeds, everything that you can hope to find, past seasons, different characters. You can search for characters and figure out where they were drafted in previous seasons. We're 7 seasons in, so we're still into it. But yeah, that's 7 seasons. We are just churning along. Hopefully you're here for the ride. If this is your first episode, hopefully it's not your last. But until next time, all things are possible.